Hello, I'm Dr. Sherry, author of the Cruise Through History Stories and the series of Cruise Through History storybooks. And today I'd like to take you to Itinerary 5, the one that runs from Arabia to the Atlantic, for the story of Petra, the ancient city of trade. Anytime you mention the city of Petra, people think of those red sandstone buildings and they wonder if they were built by the Romans. But actually they were built well before the Romans came into this landscape. The city of Petra has a unique story in time. Most cities of trade are either port cities or they sit strategically on hilltops overlooking the port. Petra is neither of these. It's tucked into a little valley in the desert, and you reach it by a secretive, secretive little passageway that we call the Sig that we enjoy walking today. So, how did Petra begin? That's the story. It was hard to believe now, but in its time, it was at the crossroads of trade in the ancient world. And it was occupied from the 6th century to about the 7th century of the current era. Very long period of time. This was a land where from Yemen came myrrh and frankincense up the Arabian Peninsula. There were traders from Damascus who came south, and they encountered a group of Arabic peoples who drank no alcohol, very different people. These were the Nabateans, and the Nabateans made their living not by producing goods, but by using their camels to carry the goods for others. And they would carry the goods from the port through the desert. They went off to the port of Gaza. The people of Nabatea had a relationship with Judea on the coast. The central city, the capital of the Nabateans, was Petra. The Nabatean kingdom had a long history of doing business in Judea. During difficult times in Judea for Jews, they found safe harbor in Petra. We know in our story that King Malichus I of Petra, the Nabatean king, was known to sponsor raids into the territory of Cleopatra VII. He was quite an antagonist of hers. And after the death of Caesar and the demise of Cleopatra, Caesar's successor, Caesar Augustus, rewarded King Malichus by giving him free trade rights in the Roman Empire. As long as the Nabateans paid their tax, they were welcome to trade, and they did. And this is when many of the storehouses, many of the goods that found their way into the treasury, goods of value, gold, were stored back into the depths. Years later, many years later, when Petra was no longer a viable part of the world economy, tomb raiders came. They found gold and other precious items, and they called it the treasury. That name has remained ever since. Building Petra required long periods of peace, And during times of peace, you had idle soldiers who might revolt against the king. All the better to use these soldiers to travel to Damascus and to Jerusalem and to bring back craftsmen to build the city of Petra. And for that reason, Petra grew between the first century in the ancient era and the first century of the current era. The Nabateans built with what they had, and what they had was simply the sandstone and the mud earth. So what we see today are all of the carvings deep into the sandstone. But in its heyday, in the first century BC to the first century of the current era, there were about 10,000 people living in that open valley area. Many of those buildings were of mud, and they don't exist today. But think of 10,000 people living in this area. And right through the middle of Petra, there's what we would think of as a ditch today. Water was precious, and they knew how to create the dams that controlled the water. As you walk along the Sig, look into the wall, and you'll see a cutout. It's actually a little viaduct, not very large, number of inches, not even 2 feet. And this captured water, ran it along the walls of the entrance to the city and into the bit of a reservoir from which the people obtained their water. Well, the Romans came after that, and the Romans know how to do really 2 things. One is they know how to build roads. The stones that we walk today are really almost 2,000 years old. We wonder at this sort of Roman Arab architecture carved into sandstone. And right in the middle of what was the city, in the midst of what would have been tombs and of other buildings, the Romans carved and created a theater. But the Romans also knew how to tax their little vassal states. So they placed a tax on this road that was about 25% of the value of the goods. Well, Petra relied on caravans and being an oasis for caravans in the center of the transit of commerce in the ancient world. And merchants desiring to avoid the tax simply avoided Petra. And thus the Romans contributed not to building Petra, but to its demise. Cut off from the world, it became a very small place until it was only inhabited by cave dwellers, and the buildings began to crumble. In 1985, Petra was designated a World Heritage Site, and the Jordanian government protects the city. Today, outside of the historic city of Petra, in the commercial hotels and boutiques and restaurants, there are about 26,000 people, almost the population that existed in the ancient era. Those who come to Petra now are visitors who want to peek into history, to walk along the Sig in the same way that people have done thousands of years ago, until they reach that vista where the walls open and the treasury is there in the constant sunlight. There are so many stories of Jordan, other stories of Petra, and many more stories in the Cruise Through History series that I'd love to share with you. So until we meet on a cruise ship or join in one of these virtual tours, you can read all the stories of Cruise Through History in the storybooks that are available online and through Amazon. Until we meet again, in person or in video, be well.